There is a particular kind of horror reserved for the person who seemed, by every external measure, to be exactly what they appeared. Not a recluse. Not a misfit. Not someone who kept to themselves in a way that people would later describe as strange. No. The person who was voted most likely to inspire, who ran after-school clubs and remembered every student's birthday and attended every school play and every fundraiser, and who, behind a door that nobody ever looked behind, was capable of something that none of those students, none of those parents, none of those colleagues could have conceived of in a nightmare. On the night of September 4, 2019, Ryan Whitfield drove home from Orlando International Airport after a 3-day educational technology conference. He had been texting his wife Carla through the afternoon and into the evening. Her responses had been brief but consistent. "Fine here, Noah's eaten, drive safe." He had no reason to read anything into them. He did not. He arrived home at 11:48 p.m. The house was lit. The front door was unlocked. Carla's car was gone. He found Noah in his bedroom. He called 911 at 11:54 p.m. In 6 minutes, everything he believed about his life had ceased to be true. Carla Whitfield had been gone since early that morning. She had not run in the night. She had not fled in panic. She had, according to the cell tower data investigators would later reconstruct, slept in her own bed, driven Noah to school that morning, his last day alive, and then, after a sequence of events that the medical examiner would place between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m., packed a bag she had prepared in advance and driven north on I-95 as methodically as a woman running an errand. Brevard County Teacher of the Year. Beloved educator. Model stepmother. Gone. Rockledge Middle School sits in the heart of Brevard County, a county that has, for 6 decades, existed in the shadow of America's space program. A community where aerospace engineers and school teachers and tourists and retired military all exist in the same municipal grid, where the ordinary and the extraordinary have learned to coexist so well that neither one surprises anyone anymore. Carla Fowler had arrived at Rockledge Middle School in 2013, hired as a 6th grade science teacher at the age of 28, fresh from a master's program in science education at Florida Tech. She had come with strong recommendations, a specific methodology for teaching abstract concepts to 11 and 12-year-olds, and a quality that colleagues would later describe uniformly as the ability to make every single child feel like the most important person in the room. The award. In May 2019, Carla Whitfield, she had married Ryan Fowler in 2017 and taken his name, received the Brevard County Teacher of the Year award at a ceremony attended by the county school superintendent, the mayor of Rockledge, and roughly 300 parents, colleagues, and students who had turned up specifically because they genuinely wanted to see her win it. Her acceptance speech was later described by the Brevard County Educators Association as one of the most moving they had heard at any of their regional events. She spoke for 7 minutes without notes. She talked about a student who had failed her first 3 tests of the year and had, by January, scored a 98 on a unit exam, and about the conversation she'd had with him in those early months that had changed what he believed about himself. She did not name the student. She said she'd promised him she wouldn't. The room gave her a standing ovation that lasted 40 seconds. She placed the plaque on the windowsill of her classroom when she returned to school the following Monday. It was there until the classroom was taped off as part of a police investigation 16 weeks later. Noah James Whitfield was 10 years old in September 2019. He was Ryan's son from his first marriage. His biological mother, Joanna Whitfield, had left the family when Noah was 3. A departure that was not dramatic, not litigated, not dramatic in any way that left scars people could point to. Joanna simply stopped being present. She lived now in Oregon. She sent a birthday card most years. Noah kept them in his desk drawer in order of year, a habit Ryan had noticed and not known how to interpret. Noah had his father's build, slight, dark, quick, and his father's quietness. He was a child who listened more than he spoke, who noticed things adults missed, who had a memory for detail that sometimes startled his teachers. His 4th grade teacher had told Ryan at a parent-teacher conference that Noah was among the most observant children she had ever taught, that he had a quality of attention for a 9-year-old that was almost uncanny. He played chess. He was genuinely good at it, Good enough that his school chess club coach had spoken to Ryan about regional competitions. He had a single best friend, a boy named Jerome Akira, with whom he had a standing Saturday arrangement. Chess at Noah's, video games at Jerome's. They had not missed a Saturday in 14 months. He had, when he thought no one was watching, a habit of drawing rockets in the margins of his school books. The Space Coast does that to children who grow up there. Space is not abstract when you can hear the countdown from your backyard. The marriage. Ryan Whitfield met Carla Fowler in 2015 through mutual friends at a community barbecue. He was a curriculum director for Brevard County Schools, an administrator who had started as a teacher and worked his way up. She was, by the time they met, already establishing herself as one of the district's best classroom practitioners. They were, professionally, operating in the same world. They were, personally, an obvious match to everyone who met them together. They married in June 2017. Noah was 8. He was the ring bearer, as children of single parents at second marriages often are, placed at the center of a ceremony that was, among other things, meant to tell him he was included, that the new arrangement was his too, that nothing was being taken away from him. Noah had smiled in every photograph from the wedding. He had danced at the reception. He had, to all appearances, been fine. Ryan Whitfield would later tell investigators that he had believed, for the first year of the marriage, that his son and his new wife had a genuinely warm relationship. That Carla had made real efforts to connect with Noah, taking him to science exhibits, helping him with chess tactics, attending his school events. He had been grateful. He had been relieved. He had not, for a long time, looked at what was beneath the surface. What was underneath? The shift began, Ryan would say, around the 18-month mark of the marriage, late 2018. Subtle at first. Carla becoming less engaged with Noah at home while maintaining her warmth at school and in social settings. Small criticisms of Noah in private that Ryan initially read as the friction of blended family adjustment. An increasing tendency to frame Noah's ordinary child behavior as deliberate provocation, as if he was, in her private reading of him, doing things intentionally to make her life harder. Ryan dismissed it. He was away several days a month for work. When he was home, things seemed fine. Carla was still Carla, attentive, warm, engaged. It was only in the cracks between his presence that something different was operating. And Noah, who was quiet and who had the particular discretion of a child who had already lost one parent and did not want to jeopardize the stability he had found, said very little. He said it once. In August 2019, 1 month before his death. He said it to his friend Jerome. Jerome Akira, age 11, would testify at trial. Jerome Akira was 11 years old when he testified at Carla Whitfield's trial. He was 12 by the time he took the stand, but he had been 11 when Noah had said the thing that Jerome had held inside for 14 months. Held because he was a child and because adults had not asked the right question, and because the way Noah had said it had carried a specific weight of please don't make this worse that Jerome had understood and honored in the way that children honor each other's unspoken instructions. On a Saturday afternoon in August 2019, their standing chess day, Noah and Jerome had been on the Whitfield's back porch. Carla had gone out. Ryan was at a conference in Jacksonville. They were alone in the way that 10 and 11-year-olds are when the adults are elsewhere, completely and contentedly unsupervised, absorbed in a chess game and a bag of pretzels. Jerome had asked Noah, in the direct way of children who don't yet know to dress questions in social padding, whether he liked having a stepmom. Noah had been quiet for a long time, long enough that Jerome thought he hadn't heard. Then Noah said, "She's nice to me when Dad's home. When Dad's not home she's different." Jerome had asked, "Different how?" Noah had thought about it. He had said, "Like she doesn't think about me at all. Like I'm furniture." Then he had moved his night and changed the subject, and Jerome had let him because that was what Noah needed. Why Jerome didn't tell anyone. Jerome did not tell his parents what Noah had said. He was asked about this at trial, gently and with considerable care by the prosecution's child witness coordinator. He said he hadn't told because Noah hadn't wanted him to. He said you could tell when Noah was saying something he needed you to hear but not act on. He said that Noah had looked at him after saying like furniture, with an expression that he could only describe, in a 12-year-old's vocabulary, as please don't. He said he had thought about that look every day since September, the month before. In the 4 weeks between that Saturday and Noah's death, investigators would later reconstruct, through phone records, school attendance logs and statements from neighbors, a picture of life at the Whitfield house when Ryan was away. Carla's behavior, by every account that surfaced only after the crime came to light, was characterized by absence. Not physical violence as a pattern, but a systematic withholding of care that left Noah, on the days his father wasn't home, effectively alone in a house with a woman who had decided he didn't exist. He was not fed properly on those days. His school lunch account records, subpoenaed by investigators, showed that on the days Ryan was traveling in July and August 2019, Noah was topping up his account himself, with the $5 emergency money Ryan gave him for genuine emergencies, because Carla had not packed his lunch and had not transferred money to his account. He had done this 4 times in 6 weeks without telling his father. He had, investigators concluded, understood that telling his father meant a confrontation with Carla, and that a confrontation with Carla meant consequences he would bear alone when Ryan left again. So he used his emergency money. He ate his school lunch. He came home to a woman who looked through him like a window. And one afternoon in early September, something shifted in Carla Whitfield, something that had been building long enough for her to have planned what came after, and Noah's quiet endurance ran out of time. September 3, 2019 was a Tuesday. It was the 3rd day of the school year at Rockledge Middle, Carla's school, and the 3rd day of the year at Noah's elementary school, Suntry Academy, 6 minutes drive away. Ryan Whitfield had left Sunday evening for a 3-day educational technology conference at the Orlando Convention Center. He had kissed Noah goodbye. He had told Carla he'd be back late Thursday. He texted her from the car to say he'd extended by a day. She had replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That was the last organic communication between them. Tuesday morning, Carla drove Noah to Suntry Academy at 7:45 a.m. This was confirmed by the school's security camera and by 2 parents in the drop-off line who recognized her. She arrived back at the house by 8:10 a.m. She taught 3 classes at Rockledge Middle. She attended a staff meeting at 3:15. She was logged leaving the Rockledge car park at 4:08 p.m. She picked Noah up from Suntry Academy's aftercare program at 4:22 p.m. The aftercare supervisor, a woman named Darla Hendricks, confirmed it. She said Noah had seemed fine, maybe a little quiet, she said, but he was usually a bit quiet at pickup. She said he'd waved goodbye to a friend. She said nothing about the pickup had seemed unusual. At 4:22 p.m., Noah Whitfield got into his stepmother's car alive. The Brevard County Medical Examiner would later establish that he was dead by 5:45 p.m. What happened in the house? The Brevard County Medical Examiner, Dr. Sandra Osei, determined that Noah Whitfield had died from asphyxiation consistent with manual strangulation. Her report established the time of death as between 5 o'clock and 5:45 p.m. The forensic examination of the house found evidence of a struggle in the hallway between the living room and the stairs, a wall-mounted photograph knocked from its hook, a small table displaced, marks on the hallway skirting board consistent with a struggle at floor level. He had not died quickly or without resistance. He had fought back in the way that a 10-year-old boy, slight and outmatched, can fight back, and the evidence of that resistance was there in the hallway of his home, mute and permanent, when investigators arrived the following day. Dr. Osei's testimony at trial on this point was delivered, by necessity, in clinical language. The prosecution did not ask her to dramatize it. They didn't need to. The measurements, the findings, the photographs, presented without editorialization, were sufficient to produce absolute silence in the courtroom. A silence that lasted nearly 15 seconds before the judge asked if counsel was ready to proceed. What Carla did next. Carla Whitfield did not call 911. She did not call Ryan. She did not call anyone. What she did, over the next 6 hours, was execute a departure plan that she had assembled over the preceding 6 weeks with a thoroughness that would come to define, for investigators and for the jury, the nature of the crime. Not impulse. Not accident. Not a terrible moment that became something she hadn't intended. A plan. She had, 6 weeks earlier, opened a prepaid cell phone account under a false name at a Walmart in Titusville, a Walmart with no connection to her regular shopping patterns. She had, 4 weeks earlier, made 2 cash withdrawals from a joint account on separate days at separate branches, in amounts small enough not to trigger a bank alert. She had $2,400 in cash. She had a go bag in the back of her closet, clothes, toiletries, a fake ID she had obtained through a contact investigators would spend 8 months trying to identify. She had researched, using a private browser on a library computer in Cocoa Beach, border procedures at the Texas-Mexico crossing at Laredo. She had thought about this for 6 weeks. She had thought about it while standing in front of her classroom with the Teacher of the Year plaque on the windowsill. She had thought about it while Ryan was at conferences and she was in the house with Noah, the child she had decided, at some point in some private calculation, was the problem she intended to remove. 6 weeks of preparation. A fake identity. A library computer in another city so her search history would never be found. She had built an exit from a life she hadn't yet destroyed. That is the detail that investigators kept returning to. She planned to leave before she planned to kill. The murder was not the crisis, it was the event that made the departure necessary. She had been preparing to disappear before she decided to make Noah disappear first. Ryan Whitfield had texted Carla 3 times between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. on the drive home. He had texted to say he was on his way. He had texted to say he'd stop at the gas station on Wickham Road so she didn't need to wait up. He had texted a final time to say he was 20 minutes out. None of his texts received a reply. He registered this but explained it, the way people explain things that are about to shatter them, as Carla having gone to bed early. She sometimes turned her phone to silent after 9. He wasn't concerned. He was tired. He was thinking about a shower and his own bed and seeing Noah in the morning. He arrived home at 11:48 p.m. He noticed Carla's car was not in the driveway. He thought she might have parked in the street. She did occasionally if she'd come home late and the driveway light was out. He went inside. The house was lit. It was quiet in a way that felt, he would later say, like a held breath. Not the quiet of people sleeping, but the quiet of empty rooms that had been left by someone who knew they were leaving them. He checked the bedroom. Carla's side of the wardrobe was partially emptied. Her go-bag was gone. He registered this without processing it. His mind was moving in a direction it hadn't reached yet, pulling back from something it could see but wasn't ready to name. He went to Noah's room. He called 911 at 11:54 p.m. The call lasted 9 minutes. In those 9 minutes, the Brevard County Sheriff's Office dispatched 4 deputies and a supervising sergeant to the Whitfield home, initiated a BOLO for Carla Whitfield's vehicle, and placed a call to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. A homicide investigation was formally opened at 12:31 a.m. on September 5, 2019. The first hours. The lead investigator assigned to the case was Detective Sergeant Adriana Cruz of the Brevard County Sheriff's Major Crimes Unit. Cruz had 11 years in the unit. She had worked over 200 cases. She arrived at the Whitfield home at 1:15 a.m. and spent the next 4 hours walking through what the crime scene told her before a single interview had been conducted. The crime scene told her a great deal. The wardrobe, the cash drawer in the kitchen, emptied. A specific pattern of undisturbance in the rest of the house that told Cruz this had not been a ransacking or an interrupted burglary or any of the alternative explanations that a defense lawyer might later try to plant. This was a house from which someone had taken exactly what they had decided in advance to take and left everything else exactly in place. The displaced photograph in the hallway. The table. The marks at floor level. Cruz walked through it all at 2 a.m. in a house where every light was on and a crime scene team was beginning its work around her, and she built, in her own mind, the shape of what had happened here. Not evidence yet, not testimony, but the shape of a person. Organized, pre-planned, controlled. Someone who had not panicked. Someone who had, in fact, the opposite of panicked. A fugitive arrest warrant for Carla Denise Whitfield was issued by Brevard County Circuit Court at 9:40 a.m. on September 5, 2019, less than 10 hours after Noah's body was discovered. The warrant triggered a national alert through NCIC and an immediate Amber Alert system. Though the Amber Alert protocols technically applied to child abduction rather than the case at hand, law enforcement issued a modified advisory under a separate missing and endangered framework. Carla's vehicle, a white 2017 Honda CR-V Florida plate registered to her personally, was the primary target. What investigators did not know in those first hours was that Carla had anticipated this. She had, in the weeks of preparation, obtained magnetic stick-on license covers, the kind used legally in some states for privacy on private property but not legal for road use, and had applied them over her Florida plate somewhere north of Titusville. Her CR-V became, on the road, a vehicle wearing someone else's plate. The Florida plate was picked up by a toll reader at the Flagler County line at 9:52 p.m. on September 3rd, 5 hours after she had left Crestwood Way. After that, nothing. The plate disappeared from the highway surveillance network. She had planned even this. The prepaid phone, the variable she almost controlled. Carla had abandoned her registered cell phone at the house. She knew it was a tracking device. Her prepaid phone, registered under a false name, was her clean line of communication. She was disciplined about it. She turned it off between uses. She used it only for brief, specific purposes. But prepaid phones, like all phones, ping towers. And tower pings are logged regardless of whether the phone is registered or not. The challenge for investigators was identifying which of the thousands of prepaid devices active on a given tower was the one associated with Carla. They solved this through a technique that the prosecution's digital forensics expert described at trial as triangulation by elimination, cross-referencing the tower data against every registered device in the same geographic area and removing them, one by one, until only unregistered devices remained, and then tracking those through subsequent towers to map their movement. It took 48 hours of digital forensics work. At the end of it, detective crews had a shadow route, the movement of an unregistered prepaid device that had traveled north through Florida into Georgia, across South Carolina and into North Carolina, where it had gone dark at a cell tower outside Asheville. The route was consistent with someone heading for a specific destination. Not the Mexican border, which her library searches had suggested. Something else. Something she had not searched for because she knew enough to not search for it. The sister. Investigative work, old-fashioned, methodical, phone-based investigative work that ran parallel to the digital forensics, produced a lead that the technology had not. A detective working Carla's background traced her family connections. Carla's older sister, Meredith Fowler Park, lived in Asheville, North Carolina. She was married. She had 3 children. She had, according to her social media accounts, not been in contact with Carla publicly for over a year. She had been in contact privately. For calls between Carla's prepaid number and a cell phone registered to Meredith Fowler Park had been made in the 8 weeks before Noah's death. 2 calls on the day of the murder, one at 6:40 p.m., one at 9:15 p.m. The second call lasting 11 minutes. Meredith Fowler Park opened her front door to North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation agents on the morning of September 7th. Carla Whitfield was asleep in the guest bedroom. She was placed under arrest without incident. She said nothing when the handcuffs went on. She did not look at her sister. She looked at the floor. And she kept looking at the floor for the entire time it took to process her at the Buncombe County Detention Center, and all the way through extradition, and into the courtroom at Brevard County. Carla Whitfield was extradited to Florida and arrived at the Brevard County Sheriff's Office on September 10th. She had spent 3 days in North Carolina with a public defender, time during which she had said almost nothing. She had a private attorney by the time she reached Florida. Graham Solis of Solis and Hecht, Orlando, one of the most experienced criminal defense litigators in the state. He had driven to Brevard County the night she arrived. Solis advised Carla not to speak. She did not speak. What she gave Detective Cruz across the table in an interview room on September 10th was 2 hours of silence so complete and so controlled that Cruz later said it was, in its own way, among the most unnerving things she had experienced in 11 years of interviewing suspects. Not agitated silence. Not frightened silence. Not the silence of someone struggling not to speak. The silence of someone who had already calculated exactly how this was going to go and had determined that speaking added no value to the calculation. Cruz placed the evidence in front of her, item by item: photographs, the prepaid phone records, the library computer browsing history, the fake ID. Carla looked at each piece and looked away and said nothing. Cruz placed the hallway photographs in front of her: the displaced table, the marks at floor level, the evidence of Noah's resistance. Carla looked at the photographs for a longer time than she had looked at any other piece of evidence. Then she looked at the wall beside Cruz's head and did not look at the photographs again. Cruz asked, at the end of the 2 hours, a single direct question. She asked, "Is there anything you want to say about Noah?" Carla Whitfield looked at her. She said nothing. The interview was over. What the silence communicated. Graham Solis later told media that his client's silence in interview was consistent with his legal advice and was not evidence of guilt. This is technically accurate. Silence in a police interview is a legal right, not an admission. What Cruz communicated to prosecutors in her post-interview brief was something different. She wrote that in her professional assessment, Carla Whitfield's composure across all phases of the case, the preparation, the departure, the time at her sister's, the extradition, the interview, was not the composure of someone managing the aftermath of a crisis. It was the composure of someone who had, in advance, made peace with the possibility of this outcome and had decided how she would conduct herself within it. She had planned the murder. She had planned the flight. She had planned the silence. At some point in the preceding weeks, Carla Whitfield had sat down, metaphorically, in whatever way people sit down with the worst versions of themselves, and worked out not only what she was going to do but who she was going to be when she was caught. The arrest of Brevard County Teacher of the Year Carla Whitfield did not stay local. It went national within 24 hours of her name being publicly released. The combination of the award, the crime, and the details of her preparation produced a level of media coverage that the Brevard County School District, by its own later admission, was wholly unprepared for. Rockledge Middle School's principal, Dr. James Achebe, issued a statement that said the school community was in shock and that every possible support would be provided to students and staff. He said that, and he meant it, and it was true, and it was also a spectacular understatement of what it felt like to be a staff member or a parent at Rockledge Middle in the week of September 7, 2019. The parents of Carla's students faced a particular version of the collective revision that follows cases like this. Carla had been in a classroom with their children for 6 years. She had built relationships with their children that some of those children valued more than almost any adult relationship in their lives. She had been trusted, institutionally, legally, professionally, with their kids 5 days a week for 9 months of every year since 2013. And she had, at 4:22 p.m. on a Tuesday, picked up a 10-year-old boy from aftercare and killed him in a hallway. Investigators conducted pastoral interviews with all of Carla's current and former students who could be reached, age-appropriate, carefully managed, focused on whether any student had experienced anything concerning in her classroom. The overwhelming finding was, no. Carla in a classroom was Carla as her colleagues described her. Carla at home, with Noah, was a different operating environment entirely. The compartmentalization was almost total. Almost. One student, a 12-year-old girl named Priya who had been in Carla's class the previous year, told investigators something that nobody had flagged at the time but that she had remembered. She said that once, when showing the class a photograph from her home for a family-themed unit, Carla had shown a photo of herself and Ryan at the beach, and that in the photo Noah had been cropped out. She said she could see his arm at the edge. She said she had thought it was just how the photo had come out. She said she thought about it differently now. The trial of Carla Denise Whitfield opened on November 2, 2020, 14 months and 4 weeks after Noah Whitfield's death. The delay was partly pandemic-related, partly the result of extensive when he was clearing Noah's room in November 2019 and which he had not been able to throw away. He spoke about a thing Noah had said to him once, on a road trip to see a rocket launch at Kennedy Space Center. Noah had been looking out the window at the gantries and had said, very quietly as if talking to himself, "I want to build something that matters." Ryan had told him he would.